All right, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if this is on. Is it on? Okay. Excellent, even better. So welcome, everybody. My name is Kate Diaz. I'm president of the Connecticut Education Association. And quite frankly, normally I'm sitting over in that seat giving testimony in a space like this. So this is fun to be on this side of the microphones. We're here today to do something really, I think, explicitly important. It's new and different for our state to have this conversation in this way. And I think it's an exciting opportunity to bring together stakeholders around the Department of Children and Families to talk about why this is such an important asset to our state, how we integrate our roles as educators, parents, advocates, and administration, and how we can better utilize our resources at the state level to do the most important thing we can do, which is to protect children. And our focus throughout this day will really be, what are our different experiences? How are we working with the department? How is the department working with us? What our expectations are in those interactions, and what our goals for the future are. Because I think the important vision I think we have is a department that can really meet all the needs of the children in the state and their families, and that where we are integrated as a supportive network that inherently believes in the importance of uplifting and taking care of children in the state. And I think that is at the heart of our coming together, is that unified mission that we can't have systems that pull us apart when children are at stake. We have to have systems that bring us together and put together tight networks. And so I'm excited to get involved in this. We have some really great speakers and panelists. I'm grateful to be sitting up here with parent advocates, members of DCF, are my colleagues. We have attorneys. So I will, I'm going to throw this over to our wonderful commissioner who has kind of helped support this effort, and give you the floor. Commissioner Durantes.
Thank you so much. And partnerships matter. They matter mostly for the children and families that we are all here to serve. And so we're excited to be able to host this forum. DCF is a participant on the panel, but mostly we are here to listen as well, because if you just Google mandated reporting, right now you will see across the country, jurisdictions are grappling with the need to make sure that children are safe, but also ensure that families have the resources that they need, and that our educational professionals are also equipped with the resources that they need to provide that linkage to support and help. We also want to make sure that we highlight the fact that over time, the child protection system is evolving to a child and family well-being system. And while doing that, we know that our partners are evolving with us. And so we are grateful to CEA for hosting this forum today. We're grateful to the legislators in attendance. We are grateful to our parent partners. We are also grateful to CASP and all of the other supporting cast members that make things great for Connecticut's kids and families. The poet Maya Angelou says, once we know better, we must do better. And so as we evolve into a child and family well-being system, this conversation will serve as an anchor for us to do just that. I have now the distinct pleasure of introducing our moderator for this afternoon's conversation, who is a dear friend of mine, because we were once colleagues here in New England, as he was the commissioner at the New Hampshire Department of Children and Families, where he did extensive work in mandated reporter assessment and reform in that state. He was formerly the general counsel, then the deputy commissioner in the New Jersey Department of Children and Families. And he and I often find ourselves on panels together and are affectionately called Jonessa, because we're always together. So without further ado, I will introduce the Senior Director of Child Welfare and Juvenile Justice Policy for Annie E. Casey Foundation, Mr. Joe Ripsum.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Good afternoon. Again, Joe Ripsum with the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and just thank everybody for having me and having this panel and listening to this conversation. As the Commissioner mentioned, right, there's a conversation that's been happening for a number of years across the country to really try to get at the role of mandated reporting and to get at the role of child protection and the investigatory response of child protection, which is really the way child protection is designed to respond in an investigatory manner. and the impact that that has on the families that we serve, who really are the most important folks in this whole conversation, right? The families and their kids are really the center of this, and the impact it has on systems is important. The impact it has on teachers and schools is important, but the biggest, most important piece is the impact it has on families. And the idea that an investigatory punitive feeling response often ends up in a place where families are less likely to get the help they need and less likely to turn to the people in their communities and trust the people in the communities that they need to trust to get the help they need. And that includes teachers. So, really want to center that thought in this as well. So with that perspective, we very grateful to, in addition to the education folks that are here, in addition to the DCF folks here, have a couple parents with some experience to be able to speak to some of these other issues as well. And with that, we're going to do a quick round of introductions with folks. And I'll start off with Beresford all the way down on my left, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Beresford Wilson. Currently, I am the Executive Director of the statewide multicultural family support organization known as FAVOR. I'm also a parent.
And good afternoon. I am Michael Williams, the Deputy Commissioner of Operations for the Department of Children and Families.
Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Damon, the Caroline Director at DCF.
Hello, my name is Nancy Rodriguez, and I'm a parent advocate.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Freeman. I'm the superintendent in Guilford Public Schools.
Good afternoon. I'm Adrienne DeLuca. I'm General Counsel for CEA.
Excellent. So we have a great panel up here, folks, who can provide a number of perspectives on this issue. And I did want to open it up, hearing a little bit from our educators around the impact that the current practices have on them. And I think I'll first turn to our colleague here from the Superintendent Association, Mr. Paul Freeman, to talk a little bit about the ways that the legal changes that happened here back in 2018 have impacted the ways that superintendents and schools report abuse or neglect.
Thank you very much. I'll keep this pretty brief and fairly simple at this stage. I think most of the conversation is going to take place during the question and answer. But from a systemic point of view, the lowering of the bar, the idea that any mandated reporter needed to bring forward any suspicious activity. And in fact, we were directed that we're not to apply any level of professional discernment to a decision. If there's any suspicion that something is reportable, that we must bring that forward. And then tied to that was the fact that if you failed to bring anything forward, your certification was at stake, your career was at stake. There could be criminal charges if you failed to report something. That led professionals in the system to feel like you needed to make these overly conservative decisions in order to protect your system, your school, and fundamentally yourself. It put us in a position where we weren't reaching out to offer help to families initially. We were immediately saying, oh my God, this might be reportable. And we wound up worrying about our foresight versus everybody else's hindsight. That if someday down the road, it turns out there could have been anything here and we did not report, then we were going to be on the hook. And not just for an honest mistake, but for a mistake that could cost an educator their certificate, their livelihood moving forward. Systems ended up responding in exactly the same way. So individual classroom teachers felt like their relationships with individual families were in tension here. Systems ended up feeling that we were in that same tension with our own employees. So now when a suggestion that a teacher had done something wrong was brought forward, we couldn't begin looking into that thoughtfully, professionally, and independently the way we might have in the past. We needed to start. The first step had to be reporting ourselves to DCF. And then that had us branch down a completely different way to respond. So I do want to start by saying Protecting kids is our first and foremost responsibility. We are not, as professionals, suggesting that we need to lower a bar about how we support and protect children. But this reality, the way that we work currently, creates a tension and a stress about self-preservation versus being able to really, I just focus on the well-being of students and of children and families moving forward. Again, I know that's really brief. I know that's really high level, but I'll be happy to speak more in detail as we continue.
Thank you so much for that. And actually, one of the things you said, I might jump already a little bit out of my agenda and ask Michael a question here, because one of the things you said there was this idea of having to report any suspicion, right? And I think that's something that folks, when you think about abuse and neglect, folks oftentimes go to the most extreme types of situations, which I don't think anybody's talking about, that you shouldn't report horrible things that are happening to kids. But any suspicion of abuse or neglect does include lots and lots of behavior and lots of challenges that are not so extreme. And oftentimes we see this conversation nationally around the conflation of poverty and neglect, and the way that things that are really just challenges that families are experiencing end up presenting as and being reported as neglect. And I wanted to point to Michael, ask Michael a little bit to help tease that out for us.
Yeah, sure, you and I on the right wavelength. As he was talking, it was for me crystal clear that the legislation itself that we're speaking of created a sense of what we've internally labeled panic reporting, because people did not want to jeopardize their livelihood, did not want to jeopardize their certification or put themselves in any criminal position, which the legislation brought all that on. And we're making reports after reports after reports. And then when we start to look at the content of a lot of that which was being reported from particularly our school districts, most of it was related to poverty situations that families was living in urban communities in particular, but even in some of the rural communities. And rather than seeking an alternative response for that condition a child may show up in school with that caused concern, the first response was, well, let's cover ourselves and send a report to DCF and let DCF open an investigation on a family. And some were well-meaning to think that, the fact that this will help families because families are in need. And what we discover a lot is that, families, no one in Connecticut wants someone to knock on their door and saying, I'm from the Department of Children and Families here to investigate an allegation made against you for abuse or neglect of your child, but I want to help you too. All of that. I mean, the help part comes later. The trust part comes first, because now you've unsettled a parent over this allegation that's been made against them by a professional, by a school professional, others who never had a conversation with them about the condition, never discussed with them what was going on. But because they could not do it, as the superintendent described, because of their discretion and their ability to kind of look into what was going on before making a report was pretty much impacted by the law, they made the report first. And that has created just, tremendous and significant impacts in the system by way of the volume and the work that we do in communities. Not to mention, we'll get to it another time, the disparities and disproportionality that exists around folks of color.
Thank you so much, Michael. I wanted to move to a quick question for Beresford, if you don't mind, just to kind of talk about the family's perspective there, right? When you have a situation where what a family's presenting with is a need for help, a need for assistance, a need for resources, whatever it is, and the response instead is a report to the hotline and an investigator knocking on the door. Can you share a little bit about what that experience might be like for a family and the impact that can have on well-being?
Absolutely, I can share that experience because I speak from experience. Even as a contractor of DCF, having 5 boys and 5 girls, trying to co-parent that situation. I'm a father of a child who was involved in DCF services. Tried to explain to my children and my family from a young age what those presentations would bring to the household and to the family. Yeah, it is nerve-wracking. It's not, let me say this. About 24 years ago, I sat down with in a room similar to this with representatives from DCF. And I was, fresh off the block, let me say it like that. And I was asked a question. Do you think that there's over representation or diagnosis of ADHD with Black and brown kids in Hartford? And my response was, when a young boy of color has a therapeutic need, usually he gets a punitive response. And I say that because I experienced that myself as a young boy, integrating the school district of Marlborough, Connecticut in 1963, where they said, Mrs. Wilson, your son appears to have ADHD, not ADHD, because that was before they put the HD on there. 1963 was just ADD. And I started school at 3 years old, turning 4. Did I have the emotional capacity to start school when I was in Hartford? Yes, because that's where I started school. When we moved to Marlborough, Connecticut, in the 1st and 2nd grade, I didn't have the emotional capacity to deal with something that Mike Williams just said, that we might discuss later on. I didn't have the emotional capacity to deal with the racism that existed out there. As a father, when 136 was filed on me, a motion of abuse and neglect, a petition of abuse and neglect, I'm not sure I had, as a grown man, the emotional capacity to deal with that. Also knowing that the work I do on a daily basis is to keep that from happening. Poverty is not abuse. What causes certain populations to stay in poverty may be abuse. And maybe we need to look at it from that lens rather than the assumption of abuse once we get a complaint. Because that's supposed to be helped, like you said. But a lot of times the preconception of the situation, the race, ethnicity, or culture of a person, or the geographic area might be the determination of whether it's abuse or neglect or whether it's a cry for help.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I wanted to move to a similar question for Nessie here around examples that for you or the parents that you've worked with where mandated reporting has had a negative effect.
Absolutely. I mean, I work with parents all of the time, and it's not just about the impact that's happening within the schools, but also the relationships that are being built within the schools with the teachers and the parents. And at that point, you start to develop these tensions with the educators, because these are the people that are supposed to be educating you, that are supposed to be helping you and getting your family to the next level. And now we have a DCF case involved. And so that's going to create a lot of tension, and parents then don't begin to trust not just the DCF worker, but also the educators, right? So if I can't trust my child while they're at school, then, where can I trust my child? And one of the things that I find most disheartening is that, for a Hispanic, and I know of a story where a Hispanic mom, the child was making, he was bragging about a mark that mom had made. And unfortunately, the not knowing the cultural differences within families can create such an impact on that when a DCF report was made on this particular family, the investigator did not take into context what the history of it was, the cultural differences. And I say that not because, because I work with Hispanic families, but because that family was me. And so these traumatic experiences really affect not only, like I mentioned, the schools, but also now the kids are fearful of what's going to happen next, right? And now the trauma is even bigger based on, well, what's going to happen to us rather than the mark that the child just had, and we need to take into account that this is happening all across, mostly to Black and brown families, and our communities are really being impacted. So while everyone's being afraid, well, I'm going to lose my certification, these families are saying, am I going to lose my kids, our livelihood, what we work for, what we live for? And that's what's most disheartening in these cases.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I wanted to move back, Kate, for a question to you, a couple parts. Is one, maybe just a general response to, where do you see from the school's perspective, what the role should be in this space? And then, I think an awful lot of what we've heard from our superintendent Freeman's comments too is around the role that the shift in law has played on that. And I think a prior conversation we're having just before this was around the impact specifically of the timelines associated with that, which I think has kind of popped up in some of the other conversation we just heard. So I wanted to, give you an opportunity to speak to those things.
So, I have a lot of compassion for kind of all of the speakers that are talking about this situation, because when we're facing a classroom of children, right? As teachers, we're getting to know our students, we're trying to work with them. The only way that we educate successfully is when we build successful relationships. We know that to be true. We know that to be the fundamental basis of the most successful trajectory for any child. And we've been placed into these really difficult scenarios. I think back to when I started teaching. I taught an alternative education. I had students of all different backgrounds, and we had professional latitude to have conversations, to understand some of the nuances of how our families functioned, to get to know them, to know when things were real and when they weren't, when there was things for concern, when there was a change in how that dialogue was occurring, when we knew there was danger and when there wasn't. But that takes time to get to know children, to get to know their families, to know their cultures, their backgrounds, to understand them. When I think back to where, 5 years ago, we were not in a space where I was given that opportunity. We were now entered into a space where if I hear two kids having chatter about something and a kid says something like, oh, my dad's going to kill me, or, and they're joking around and saying, oh, they're going to lock me in the closet for doing this. I no longer have the professional judgment to take time and go, kiddo, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? And they tell me their story. I don't have that. I don't have the opportunity to call the family and say, hey, your kiddo said this in class today. Walk me through what's going on. Is there an issue? I don't even oftentimes have the time to talk to my building principal and say, you know what, this happened in class today. What should I do? Instead, we've gotten to this hyper vigilant process whereby I don't actually have that space to have that conversation, or even the professional respect to make a judgment call. Because if I professionally judge this to be kids chatter, or just something that is a way kids are talking about their families, if somebody else decides I'm wrong, I can go to jail. So I don't have the room to make an error in judgment or to make a decision. In fact, I don't even have the time, because I have 12 hours. And let's say this chit chat was going in my classroom after school and it's 2:15. I now have 12 hours to determine if this is real or not. And then actually I can't even make the judgment because my judgment doesn't matter. And we find ourselves in this awful cycle of, I don't want to make this. This isn't what I want to do. This is not the way I want to do business, but I have no other choice. And it leads us down these really weird pathways. And I remember at one point, I had a colleague who a kid was playing with a whiteboard. They were a first grade teacher, and they were flicking the side of the whiteboard because that's what first graders do, is they play with loose things. If you've ever had a first grader, you know what they do. And the kid caught their finger in the thing they shouldn't have been playing with. So we bring the child down to the nurse. We say, oh, they got this boo-boo in class. And the principal looks at them and goes, you have to report this to DCF. And the teacher was like, who am I reporting? And they're like, you have to report yourself. And they were like, but isn't the basic premise that I believe there was abuse or neglect? And they're like, it doesn't matter. The kid was injured in your class. You've got to report yourself. There's zero people who think there was abuse or neglect going on, but your professional judgment has been removed. Your principal, superintendent, everybody's professional judgment gets removed. We have to report it to DCF. It was before the online reporting. So now you have to sit on the phone for, however long it is till you get through to make this report that everybody knows is nonsense. So you end up in this cycle. When we talk about the family perspective on that, I've sat in meetings with administrators going, hey, I'm worried about this kid. This is what's going on. I don't actually think it's their parents, because that's the other thing, particularly for me with high school students, they can get themselves into trouble well outside parental boundaries. And we're stuck going, well, we don't know, we don't have the time, we have to report it to DCF. And you go down a pathway that's not helpful to anyone and does create barriers between children and teachers. And we don't want that. We know that the best way to help our kids is to be able to build our capacity and to have relationships. When we report a family to DCF, that breaks down that we don't have that respect and trust. And I don't blame a parent. If I were in their same shoes, I would now have the same suspicions. You don't trust me as a parent. You don't respect me as a parent. That's how I feel as a teacher. So why wouldn't a parent feel that way? So we've built a system that inherently says we don't trust the parents. We don't trust the educators. So we're going to criminalize all behavior and hope it all works out for the best. So, which is abundantly, I think, resource like just sucks everybody's life out of the system and doesn't land us where we need to be, which is ultimately making sure kids are in good places. So yeah, it's a joy to really deal with that for sure.
Thank you, Kate. Something you said there made me want to pivot back to Nessie for a minute around right, the idea of trust, the idea of trying to make sure parents are able to get the support that they need. And just wondering if you could share a little bit about what alternatives you think can be explored to help connecting families with necessary resources without necessarily involving a mandated report or child protective services.
Absolutely. I think it stems down to really getting to know what the family needs are. And let's just say in the beginning of the school year, you're getting to know the parents. And I know a lot of times parents may have a hard time showing up, but a simple phone call can really help out. Just being able to have that cultural awareness as well, getting to know the child, really understanding what are the family dynamics, what does it look like at home, and if there are needs, why aren't we helping them find those resources necessary in order to get that, rather than calling DCF. A lot of times I've worked with families, like let's just say, they don't have a food resource, or they have that English barrier, and so they utilize these barriers against them. Okay, so that say they don't have food right now, where can we get SNAP? Where can we get them to a food pantry? These things help tremendously for parents. Oftentimes maybe they don't have access to a car in order to go grocery shopping, and it's this ripple effect. And the last thing that they need is DCF to come knocking on the door saying, well, you weren't feeding your children, and coming at them also with this accusatory feeling. And it's like, that's not what we did, right? Like they're trying to defend themselves to the max. So just being able to be culturally aware, being able to find the resources for them and not accusing them in a way, get the context, get the full history, right? We can't make decisions. I would hate for someone to come here, even on this panel, I don't know any of you, and I'd love to get to know all of you, but place judgment on what I see today. That's not fair, right? And so we just have to be aware of what we're doing with these families.
Thank you so much. And I think, right, part of what we're hearing is this tension between what families need and what's actually helpful to families, and what our structures are and what the pressures are that particularly educators feel around their reporting obligations. And to that end, I'd like to pivot to Adrian a little bit to talk about, how do you advise, how do the schools advise and train folks around their reporting obligations, and to what extent is that really driven by what you think your legal mandates are versus what you think is best for families?
Thank you. So that has evolved throughout time. I'm entering my 12th year at CEA, and I can tell you that what I said 12 years ago is very different than what I say today. Because 12 years ago, first of all, there was a 48-hour reporting that changed to 24, that changed to 12. And back 12 years ago, we would train our teachers to use the discretion provided in the statute. You have to have a reasonable suspicion. So you're given some discretion in that statute. In addition, we had the indemnification statute that said, if you in good faith didn't report, you're going to be immune from any kind of prosecution. So then in 2015, the failure to report statute was raised to a Class E felony. And then in 2018, we lost that good faith language. So unfortunately, the pendulum has gone kind of back and forth. It was use your best judgment, your professionals, do what you think is right, to now we just tell our folks to report, report, report. You can't go wrong by reporting. But I would like to share just really quickly, and a little bit off topic, as a result of doing that, I put together our statistics for the last 5 years, and our friends from AFT gave me theirs as well. And I can tell you that we have never been under a 94% unsubstantiation rate. That tells you we're over-reporting. So, unfortunately, we are now telling our teachers, because you don't just face losing your certification or a substantiation. You're looking at potentially a year in jail, a felony, and a criminal background. So we tell them just report.
Thanks for that, Adrian. And those are, I mean, the ramifications that you raised they're pretty harsh compared to other state statutes around the country. And I think it's a space for folks to think about. With that, I think I want to turn back to Superintendent Freeman here and just talk a little bit about what some of the operational challenges are that are associated with this shift in the way that mandatory reporting has happened for school districts.
I think first and foremost, the concern for us becomes the loss of that relationship with the families. There's no way that we would advise our staff to put themselves at risk. And so we end up giving exactly the same advice in district. We end up following that same course of action in district, and know that every time we do that, we're sacrificing a relationship with a family. I can't in good conscience look at the people who work in my school district and say, take a chance, risk your family in order to reach out. And so we end up putting ourselves in tension with our families. And that may not be operational, but that is the biggest, I think, the biggest cost. Operationally, what happens is that it sucks up time. And so we end up having, and the online reporting streamlined it, but it didn't solve the root problem. It just made it faster to file these unnecessary reports. But there were times right out of the box where we had teachers and school counselors sitting in an office on hold for hours while instruction wasn't happening, because we were trying to get those reports done on time. So now it's faster, but that isn't really a solution. And then there comes the point where we're now exacerbating the realities of the teacher shortage, because in many school districts, and we've got carts and horses all mixed up. But in many of our school systems, if you had a teacher who was now facing a DCF complaint, that teacher would often be placed on paid administrative leave while the district was able to catch their breath and look into what that complaint had been. Now, because those complaints are becoming foundational, we've actually got teachers who are being told to report themselves. We're now ending up in places where some districts are then saying, well, there's a DCF case pending against you. We're going to put you out of the classroom while we now look into that DCF complaint. And we're getting more and more absurd stories that are rolling out as a result of what we're trying to do to try to respond to this, and then still protect children in the real serious cases who need that protection, but also meet all the expectations of the statute and the law and the parents or the community who have concerns about this. When communities find out that that's something, and they don't find out from us, but they find out, when communities find out that there's been a complaint filed, but that teacher is still in the classroom, now you have all kinds of PR challenges that are happening. So we're causing harm in multiple layers. We're causing harm to families by getting into these confrontational relationships with them when we should be offering help. We're causing harm to reputations, even when all of a sudden the case isn't opened and nothing moves forward, but now it got out into the community, or it was in the paper that somebody was charged or that somebody was placed on a paid administrative leave. And we've seen that impact people's reputations and careers at the teacher level, the administrative level, even the superintendent level. And so all of it becomes this complicated mess that the district is then trying to orchestrate. And we've totally lost sight of taking care of a child in a family who needs help.
Thank you for that. With that, I have a couple questions I want to move on to. One that I want to pivot back to Beresford for a second too. One of the things that Nessie said that I think ties in with what I've really heard from both Superintendent Freeman and from Kate and Adrian here is the way that an investigation is experienced by a family, and specifically, Nessie, I think you referred to it as a traumatic experience for a family, right? It's not a benign experience for a family to be investigated. And I think a lot of folks have thought with good intent that, what's the harm? We're just going to send an investigator out and try to figure out, what's going on here and be able to provide help that way. And if that's the pathway to help, if investigation is the pathway to help, which is, again, as Nessie pointed out, a traumatic experience, what I'm looking, Beresford, maybe for you to comment on is, what exactly is that trauma that folks experience from an investigation? What does that feel like for a family?
Well, I can tell you the anxiety and the trauma happens before the investigation. And I'll speak from example again. I have a very handsome 6'5" and 6'6" son who is trying his best to make it into the NBA. And, he'll probably get drafted in the G League come this Saturday. When he was 4 years old, he was playing outside. And myself and mom were inside the house, cooking dinner, looking after the other kids. He was outside playing with a neighbor. He came running inside the house holding his arm. When I asked him to release his arm, he was severed, cut to the bone. On the way to the hospital, the conversation that mom and I had was, what are we going to tell the social worker? So the anxiety starts before. And the fact that we had to have that conversation and we had to have that concern speaks volumes. I heard a lot today that in this short time has social justice ramifications and racial justice ramifications. I think we have to look at the history and we have to look at our language. When we use words like partnership, we should define that. And myself, in the statewide organization that I represent, we define partnership as shared authority and shared responsibility. Well, we understand that there's an unequal balance there because the state agency, DCF, is governed by laws and statute. Parents don't always think law and statute first. We think emotionally. And our emotional connection to our children is dampened and it is abused when we have to worry about and have anxieties around what are we going to, well, we should be able to tell the truth. And when a family is unsubstantiated, and one of the most unbelievable statistics that I hear is what you just stated, that a 90+ referral rate compared to a less than 10% substantiation rate. A 6% substantiation rate. That's unbelievable. That makes my head just blow up. That's a real issue. And that issue doesn't lie only within DCF. It doesn't only lie within the schools, because these are especially school is an institution that this country has relied on since its inception. But the fact that we had populations that we felt should not be educated, all right, because we have systems that pull us away from working in partnership and working in collaboration. And I believe that there are three facets of collaboration that have to exist in order for it to be successful. One is integrity. The other one is trust. And the last one is even a monicum of admiration for the people you have to work with. Trusting them and admiring the fact that they have the capacity to do what you trust them to do. I think we've lost that systems-wise. We've lost that admiration, school to parents, parents to school, school to systems like child protection and child welfare, and also the justice system. We have to make moves and strides within those arenas, and we have to do it together. this bifurcation and siloed approach, it has no positive outcome. So before the investigation, there is anxiety, there is trauma. And it's not fair to any group of people or any one person that they have to go through that when they seek help. And when there's an unsubstantiation, doesn't mean that family doesn't need help anymore.
Right.
They still need help, which brought them into question.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. An awful lot in there, and actually going to have me pivot my questioning a little bit. I wanted to move over, Michael, to you to talk a little bit about kind of the data and what we see in terms of disproportionality within the system. And, you know, I think Connecticut may be the only, if not one of the only states that really have an anti-racist mission built into their statute. And with that, you know, maybe to speak a little bit both about the disproportionality, but about the work that you know you're trying to engage in to try to address those challenges.
Yeah, it's verified through all of the data that we keep by race and ethnicity and culture that we do have disproportionality as it relates to who gets made reports on. Kids of color in communities, particularly African-American kids and Latino kids in the urban communities are about 3.5 times more likely to have an abuse and neglect report made to our care line on them than white kids. Underneath that, one could say implicit bias exists, but also if you look in the communities that our children live, you have more folks in those communities who have responsibilities for kids than in other communities. You have schools, you have social workers, you have mental health centers, you have, you know, a whole host of services that exist in those communities that children and families rely on, where greater opportunities for folks to make a report occur. And therefore, that has come to be defined today as surveillance. You know, it is a surveillance system. It is one where communities of color in urban communities have so many eyes on them that if they show up in any one of those systems that exist in their communities, and there is a question about whether or not a child is abused or neglected, they are more likely to have the report made. And where they show up the most is the schools. And that's just the first stage of it, because once the report is made to us, then it's our screeners that Lisa is responsible for, and the intake workers in the 14 offices across the state. If that report that's being made is accepted by us, it gets to those intake workers who then must not have, they don't have a choice. They must then conduct an investigation and intake on that family that should last no more than 33 business days. And they have to do everything on our checklist that the protocol calls for. They can't skip anything, even though it has nothing to do with the case. They have to go to the family, say, yeah, we know it was a report about, you know, maybe excessive absenteeism, but now we need to see the health records of your baby sister, of the infant child in the home. We need to see every child's doctor's record. We need to see the dental records. You know, we need to call on this collateral contact. If you're in therapy, if your other kid's in therapy, we need to talk to those therapists. We need to do an extensive, comprehensive look into your life to make sure that we don't miss anything. Because if we do, and God forbid something else happens, somebody else will do it and say, well, you didn't see that they didn't go to the dentist twice a year, which has nothing to do with the incident, but it's a protocol and a checklist that we didn't follow. And so therefore, we would see disproportionately more Black and brown children getting substantiated on, which then the trajectory in the system, the disparities grows even larger from who gets removed from their home, who goes into congregate settings. All of that happens and gets triggered by those types of reports. Again, Lisa has the direct data because her finger's on the pulse every day. We have racial justice, we have anti-racism and racial justice practices that we've implemented in Connecticut for the past 4 or 5 years, I'm sorry, that goes at reducing those disparities inside of the department. We're doing our job. External to the department, what we have to do is partner with schools, partner with police departments, partner with hospitals to make sure they understand that, you know, they can no longer call us and make a report and in the report say, I don't believe abuse and neglect exist here, but we're making the report anyway because we have to, because that ends up being another case. And so we're trying to impact that level of disproportionality external to DCF as we do it internal within our agency.
Thanks so much, Michael. And with that, I think I do want to pivot back to this question in a minute, but I did want to get a little deeper into some of the data that Lisa can provide around, right, the call volume from schools and some of those related things around how the hotline operates and the types of calls and volumes that we hear. So, go ahead, Lisa.
Sure, that was a lot. Okay. From a report perspective, from 2006 until 2022, we saw a 65% increase in the number of reports that were received at the care line. From 2006 to 2022, we saw an 18% in our acceptance rate. We do know that the largest mandated reporters are the schools, which is pretty obvious, right? When you think about it, schools have relationships with children, and they're working with kids 6 to 8 hours in a given day. They see the kids a lot more than mental health providers and other entities. So they're our largest mandated reporter, followed by police, mental health professionals, and hospitals. So that's the largest number. About 85 or 86% of all of our reports come from mandated reporters. From a call perspective, we've seen since COVID, obviously a rise in our number of calls that we've received. Last year, it was about 88,000 calls plus online reports, which I'll explain in 1 second, that were received at the care line. This year, we are trending in the first 3 quarters. We're at about 70 plus thousand right now for calls and online reports at the care line. So we are definitely trending upward. We will surpass numbers from 2022. Just to let you know a little bit about what happens, right? So reports come into the care line in a couple of ways. They come through the phone call, and there's a screener that will take the information. We'll talk to the reporter. We'll gather demographic information from the reporter as well as the family, and then really get into the nuts and bolts of asking questions to ascertain information related to the report. You know, the who, what, where, when, why, and how. So we ask a lot of questions. From that, we then will apply what we call a structured decision-making tool, which outlines for us definitions of abuse and neglect that we will apply to the information that we've obtained, and then make a decision if it meets a statutory definition of abuse or neglect. If we believe it does, then we will then apply what we call a response time. So we have a same day, a 24-hour, and a 72-hour response time. We also have what we call differential response. In that, a case or a family can receive a traditional forensic investigation if the report is coded as same day or a 24. If it's coded as a 72-hour response, those are considered our less emergent type reports. At that point, we can offer the family a family assessment response track. The differences between the two, one is a traditional forensic investigation, and the other one and has dispositions of substantiated or unsubstantiated. And in a FAR track, it is focused on assessing the family's needs and providing support services after we've completed it. It also means that in a family assessment response, there is no substantiation or unsubstantiated disposition. Now that's through a phone call. The other way that we take reports, and what we call a non-emergent mandated reporter online portal. In listening to some of the conversations to address our wait time back in 2018, we had an antiquated phone system and a wait time that really was unacceptable. What we did was we launched a pilot for online reports, and it was very sort of preliminary. It was an email that we received, and it was outside of our phone system. As we got a new phone system and we began to work on online reports, and it was only at the beginning, it was only for schools. We piloted it for just school employees to make a report to us. We expanded that in time, adding court services staff as well as the Office of Early Childhood. We expanded it, and then we were able to launch an online portal in June of 2022. This year, we were able to take what we've learned from our online portal, created some focus groups, had some conversations about how we can enhance our portal. The online portal, it asks the same questions as you would if you were calling the care line, but oftentimes we didn't get a lot of detail. So we really wanted an opportunity to prompt the reporter to have drop downs if they weren't sure what to write, to provide them with explanations on details that we needed in order to make a report. We need detail. We need the who, what, where, when, and how, and why. It's how we can assess whether or not we should be accepting a report at the care line. I think I answered those.
You did. Thank you.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to pivot back over to Kate for a second, just to speak a little bit about the impact that this has on teacher practice.
So the interesting challenge that we face is that, teachers are very empathetic individuals. That's why they get into the profession. There's a lot of care given and thought, to what our children are doing. What we have seen is teachers have to change how they interact with children in a way that is putting distance between us and our students, right? We have to look at them in some regards as spaces where, okay, how am I going to interact with this child and their issues and their concerns? Am I going to end up myself in a situation where I'm now going to be engaged with DCF because of my communication with this child, my intentions to support them? The pandemic really kind of highlighted this when we started to have absolute panic among our teachers when we talked about going online. And we all talked about, like, we're now going to be sitting in the houses with all of these children. What does that mean for our mandated reporter status? The fact that I'm going to be sitting in a space where every single one of my students is giving me a video into their lives. And I don't know what any of it means, right? I'm watching a kid. I mean, you have to know, we saw into everybody's lives. We saw the laundry getting done. We saw the sandwiches getting made. We saw dad walking around without his shirt on. We saw it all. And we had to really have the judgment to be like, when is there a problem? When is there not? And this was a legitimate, terrifying conversation at the start of the pandemic for educators, because we understood how fragile our students were. We understood how important this time was going to be with our kids, but we also saw the potential for a really challenging space. And we didn't want to end up, initiating these adversarial spaces with our families, again, also experiencing a pandemic. So we had to have teachers who were altering their practice. How am I talking to these kids? I think about a time, when I started teaching, I would have a kid who's having a bad day and you'd give them a hug. You could hug your students. You could say, honey, it's going to be okay. And now, you feel like you're taking the risk of your life offering a hug to a child. When our elementary children want to, hug and touch their teachers and what have you, veteran teachers are like, I don't care. Like, if this is what takes me down, hugging my kids, I so be it. Like, this is what I'm going to go down for. But understand that that's a simple gesture. This notion that we're building little families in our classrooms. And this is a problem, that if I hug that child when they're in duress, I'm now going to be reported. Because if somebody sees me hugging that child, they don't have to talk to me about it. There's no obligation for a conversation. They can decide, I saw Mrs. Diaz hug Susie in the hallway, and I'm now reported to DCF for hugging a student. And I'm now embroiled, which, by the way, we have had to contract. We've contracted with a private agency now to offer counseling services for teachers involved in DCF investigations, because the process of waiting, being pushed out of your classroom, very unceremoniously escorted out of the building, being told you can't actually talk to your colleagues and support networks. And we're going to try and resolve this in 45 days, but understand that DCF is overworked on this issue. It might be longer, has such a mentally detrimental effect and impact on our teachers. We sometimes don't get those teachers back. We escort them out of this building and we say goodbye, and we never see them again. So we're trying on our end to incorporate counseling services into our work so that we can help people kind of move beyond these experiences. And those are the ones who are unsubstantiated, right? Because we're really talking about the people who've gotten engaged with the system. And truthfully, you can get to, carried through this for hugging a child. And I think we need to really understand that we're creating challenges to building that community we need to build in our schools. We want our teachers to be empathetic and caring, and we want them to take these children in and care for them. And parents want to feel like those teachers, those adults, look at my kids as their kids. We're not trying to be their parents, but in the absence of their parent, I always wanted to know that my kids' teachers were looking after them and holding them accountable and doing all the important things that happen for kids when they're in school. So I think we need to recognize that there are numbers, and then there are the people and the way that we've all had to change. And that's not for the better. It's not making our systems better by doing that.
Thank you for that. Just a couple more questions, and we'll move on to some questions from the folks here. For Nessie, I wanted to probe a little bit more around some of these challenges. And, we did hear about this pretty striking data point around education reports of abuse or neglect having an unsubstantiated rate, meaning found not to have occurred, of 94%, which is a pretty high number of times that something's being investigated and being determined not to have occurred. And that's a pretty high number of families that are being exposed to an investigatory response when oftentimes something else might have been more appropriate, some type of other helpful intervention other than someone knocking on the door. And I wanted Nessie to ask you, how can reporters, DCF, policymakers better evaluate the real and ongoing impact of their actions, especially when we think about the consequences, such as the rise in unsubstantiated reports, and think about the disproportionality involving families of color in the system?
Absolutely. And one of the things that someone mentioned was the implicit bias that occurs, but I also want to touch base on the explicit bias, right? Because I would like to think that there's a lot of well-intentioned people that, call obviously because, they obviously see something wrong, with the family, or because of, again, they're afraid. But there are many times where we've worked with families and, it is because of they don't have that cultural awareness and they intentionally don't want to learn it, right? So evaluating those sources within the schools and also within DCF, because if we're seeing someone who called it in and then the investigation, they're also expressing or showing, right, bias, that could potentially impact families even further, right? The fact that there's an investigation going on for 45 days, throughout this time, he mentioned now you're really looking into my dental records, my baby, my family. If I have a boyfriend, you're going to check into him. Like, all of these things really impact a family. And so, I feel like better training, more awareness, and just being able to call the next person out as well, right? Because what you might see as something wrong might not be, right? I think I heard recently a situation where a child was burned because of an iron. And, based on this story, it really affected me, because you think about it, if that child was burned because of an iron and you're not looking into the background of it, or you're, placed in judgment as to why the iron was on the bed or whatnot. Well, at least she was ironing clothes. I don't even iron clothes. I mean, I put them in the dryer, but for context, right? You got to think about what's happening within this family. And I think awareness and really, tapping into one another and checking one another, because oftentimes, you might not know that might be appropriate for that family. And so just checking those biases at the door, both educators, both, the workers. And I think that, I find it really very disheartening as to one of the things that he mentioned as to, poverty is not a reason for abuse or neglect, right? And it hurts families. And I hear this all the time. It's like, you're going to take my children away because I can't afford them to pay someone else, to pay a foster parent to take care of them. That sounds insane to me. And so when you put these things into perspective, right, when we could just be helping our families with resources, it's the things that really impact us the most, that really are most heartfelt. And it's like, it's out of our hands when we could do so much within the system. And it's really just tweaking, the language or tweaking some of the things that we have already, that legislators could really help on, or the system themselves could really work on, so that we're not affecting these families so much.
Thank you for that. Very powerful. I think we're going to do one last question across the board, really, for all of our panelists. And, the purpose of today wasn't necessarily to have an answer to all these problems, but hopefully to start a conversation around what's the best way for Connecticut to think through these issues and try to solve these problems. Because, what we're hearing today is that this is not working for educators. We're hearing it's not working for the department, and we're hearing it's not working for families. So I think there's reason to think that we should think about some other approach. And with that in mind, what I'd hope to hear from our panelists here is just if you could just share, and it could be general, it doesn't have to be specific changes. There's a later time for that. But what changes do you believe are needed to the underlying law and practice in this area? And I'll start to my right here with Adrian, and then we'll just kind of move on down and let everybody get a chance to respond to that.
Yeah, I think that, and I can speak for obviously the schools and teachers. I think, we have very well trained, wonderful, caring people who are educators. Give them the respect to use their own discretion as to making a decision as to what is abuse or neglect. And, we've got to move out of a space where we're just reporting everything just to save our careers. You've just got to let them be the professionals that they are. And I do think that the statutes need to change. I think they're unbelievably punitive and stringent, and my friend here has just told me that they're very different in other states. And I think we really need to take a look and overhaul the entire system of reporting.
Go ahead, Kate.
Well, obviously, I agree with that. But I also think that we should be looking at a system that can be more flexible, thoughtful, and responsive to the individuals in it. And I think there's a piece of that we as schools, if we are given the opportunity by creating statute changes, we could build our capacity in the right areas, which are less about job loss prevention and more about family outreach. And I think that there's opportunity in that, but absent any real statute change, we're stuck. And I think for me that our end game should be a flexible, responsive system that allows us to do the good work of understanding and working with our families. And I think that I would also love to see us take some of the resources that are currently dedicated to sort of this policing structure and invest them into a more preventative structured plan, so that when I, as an educator, see a kid in crisis, it's not about calling, sort of a policing entity on this family, but saying, what additional spaces can I send them to? Where is the, supportive preventative aspect of the work that we could get really into that could make big impact?
Thank you. And well,
Yeah, one, I'd like to start with a word of caution. I appreciate this question, and quite honestly, I think people don't ask me often enough, how do we fix things moving forward? But I do want to be careful that we don't simply knock the pendulum back in the other direction, and that we don't over respond or respond too quickly, which quite honestly, like everything in education, isn't solely an educational problem. If we can address some of the community issues, societal issues, if we can make sure that there are support networks and help networks in place before we get to the police state, that right, we've got to think big picture as we do this. I worry about the teachers who for the last 5 or 8 years have been told, taught, and we've reinforced this message that you're not a social worker and you're not qualified to reach out and help a family. You only are qualified to report. We need to undo all of that learning. We've got to be really thoughtful. We've got to talk about where liability is going to fall. For the first time that we raise the bar for reporting and then something is missed, and what's going to happen in that situation. But bottom line, what we need to look at is we need to look at the good faith protection. We took away the ability for teachers for educators, all mandated reporters, to in good faith try to help a family instead of reporting them to the system. And if you were just trying to be helpful, your career, your reputation, your livelihood, and possibly your freedom were now at stake. And it wasn't acceptable that you were doing your best in that moment anymore. So that's the first piece that needs to be addressed. But again, I would just caution that we not react too quickly or too broadly without thinking about the fact that education and all mandated reporters sit inside a much larger system, and that system needs to be addressed, not just how we report suspicions.
Thank you for that, Nessie.
I would piggyback off of what everyone already said, and to expand on the good faith, I would just say redefine, because we had it at one point and for some reason they didn't think it worked, right? So redefining what good faith looks like in legislation, obviously providing more training, finding more resources, because I think ultimately what we forget is that what is it that we value, right? I mean, we say, well, we're not social workers, right? You mentioned to teachers, but I mean, if it were a friend, you're not going to say, I'm not a social worker. You just out of the goodness of your heart, you want to provide that resource, right? So what is it that you're valuing? We think that, in just regular human nature, right? But also be parent centered. I think at the end of the day, parents know what they need. Parents know what they want. And if we're not able to articulate that to the system and share that, because we don't trust, because we're not, we don't feel confident enough to get the help, then it's going to fail, right? The investigation and the system is going to fail us. And then we fall back into this cycle of, well, I wasn't able to get my children, or, I lost my children because of the system. And it's a ripple effect. And so just being more parent centered, obviously for me, I think I speak on this all of the time, is having the recruitment of bicultural workers, right? Having employees that look like us, because oftentimes that's where the explicit and the implicit bias falls into place. And obviously, when we are dealing with English language learners, is providing those language services to them so that there are no barriers and miscommunications when we're working with parents.
Thank you, Nessie. Lisa?
Hi, I think for me, I mean, I think that as an agency, I want to see or have schools feel more confident, less fearful of making reports. I think, when I see the reports that come in, if there was just a few more questions asked, if they just engaged the family, it could have avoided a report being made. And I truly support that, especially when we're looking at reports and I'm like, well, that's not accept, right? If you just ask, then we don't have to, a family doesn't need to become known to us through a non-accept report. They don't have to become known to us because we've accepted a report. That DCF is, part of a system. We're not the entire child welfare system. And if we could do a better job at engaging and feeling confident and less fearful when we're talking to families and reaching out to families and trying to figure out what's happening within the family, that we could be more helpful and avoid a report to DCF.
Thank you, Lisa. Michael?
So my response would be an either or. Right? Either we increase our social work count at DCF to add more capacity for this trend that's not going down in the past 23 months, but continues to go up month after month. The highest numbers keep going. We've run out of intake capacity. We've had to mandate people to do this. We've had to take trainees and put them in intake. We have no bodies to throw at this anymore. And the numbers keep going up and up and up. We need more capacity to keep up with this trend that's occurring by way of this issue that we are discussing. That's the bottom line. We have folks over 20% of their caseload standard because they can't process the cases fast enough. You know, wait time on care line calls, you know, exceeding 30, 40 minutes, an hour, minutes, because they can't keep up with the volume that's happening. That's going to require either some things get missed and cases that have real concerns don't get the attention it has, you know, or, you know, other kinds of incidences and, you know, consequences that we don't want to have happen simply because we can't keep up. And that for us is our fear operationally at DCF, that have run out of capacity. And it would be helpful if we can address this instead of more capacity to deal with the root cause. And the root cause is the or. And the or is to give some grace to our system. The fact that, you know, though there may have been a couple of cases where failure to report played a role in a child's situation, those things have happened. But in relationship to it being a crisis in our system, it never was. We have one of the best school systems in the country. We have a highly educated workforce of teachers. And when we see what comes across, you know, it's unfortunate that our teachers have to go through that. And so we don't have a problem that warranted the response that happened, you know? And so I would say study this with the data to show you that the problem, what it really looks like, and then fashion a response that meets the needs of the problem and not one that broad brushes a whole system for something that really isn't at the level that I think we got. And so that would be my response.
Thank you, Michael. And Beresford, we'll turn to you.
Yeah, Mike, they did have my name up there on your face for a minute there, and I don't want you to carry that burden. So.
I apologize.
Thank you, but I think Deputy Commissioner Williams said it best. I do believe in the either or. You know, I thought he was going to refer to another adage, but I'm glad he said it the way he said it. And it is an either or. But I also like to add to that, because Michael spoke practically, and he has to, in his position, address the issue now as it exists. And none of us, you know, Commissioner Durantes knows, Joe, you might know the urgency that Michael speaks of, but we also have to go upstream. You know, it's one thing to take the babies out of the river right here, but we have to go upstream and see who the hell is throwing those babies in the river in the first place. So a lot of that is reviewing our history and what have you. But you spoke so properly about a resource. And the greatest resource we have are the parents of these children. And we have to bring back that trust. We have to fully employ them in the process of caring for our children and not separate what we do in systems and what we do as parents. That trust is so essential to the relationship. And then being able to come to the table as we are and who we are, and having the system meeting us where we are. My exposure to this work, and I, you know, 40 years ago, I had no idea that I'd be sitting here on a panel like this or running a statewide organization. You couldn't tell me that this is what I'd be doing. But necessity, what is the father or mother of invention? And I reinvented myself. And, you know, now I find myself as one of the most valuable resources and one of the most valuable cards, and it's not looking lofty at myself, but it is the appreciation that I've been able to gain for all sides of this, the political side and the practical side. How can I best help my appointed, my elected, and my employed officials? We have a system of checks and balances that don't work that well because we play partisan politics. We need to play humanity politics and start leaning on each other and admiring each other for our positions in what we do. Parents have a very vital position in a child's life. I don't care what you say. Doesn't mean that my biological children will be able to count on me or lean on me, but whoever they look to and whoever they call a parent, whatever support system they are able to build in their communities and whatever their community looks like, all right? We have to start embracing that also, instead of the practice of separating that and looking at a child as an individual. Fully employ parents in the process, educate them. You always have better outcomes when the parent knows what to expect. And when I speak of parent, I speak about teachers in the same view, in the same perspective as a parent, because other than the parent, the teacher has that child more than anyone else, all right? Or in some cases, the CO or the juvenile officer or the probation officer or what have you. And if we're not looking at those kids and don't see ourselves in that, then we can't relate and we won't relate. And it's not always about skin color. It's about the way we think and the way we process. I don't speak Spanish. I don't speak Mandarin. I don't speak whatever my ancestral language was, but I do speak the truth, and that's universal. And that's what we need to start doing.
Brilliant. Thank you. All right. So with that, I did want to turn to see if any of the attendees had any questions for the panel.
Hi, good afternoon. Jeff Curry, House Chair of the Education Committee. Just want to thank you all for the time you've taken today to really put a spotlight on something that many of us are very well aware of has been an issue for quite some time. And much like a lot of the information and reports that we've been hearing as of late, none of this should come as a surprise to anyone who pays attention. You know, I know I worked with Kate back when she was the president of Manchester's union on this particular issue, had brought DCF in to try to help and alleviate some of the stressors and pressures that teachers and educators were feeling. But I think it's also important to note that while we're highlighting educators in this conversation, paras are an important part of this conversation. They are in those classrooms, often working with the most dysregulated students and are falling into this trap as well. You know, the comments are made that we have one of the best school systems in the country. I know people in positions of power like to say that over and over, but I'm sorry, you have to stand in Fairfield and then step over into Bridgeport. And that is just simply not the case. And we cannot continue to say that. Luckily, though, we do have some of the best trained educators and the best trained paras who are able to step into those communities to provide the supports that those students need. Those teachers should be trusted. Those teachers should be respected to do their job and not feel as though that they constantly have to cover their ass in order to do that job, to provide those children with that high quality educational experience. Capacity is an issue at every single state agency, state, local, everywhere. We have to get people into these positions who are able to relieve some of this pressure. And finally, these conversations of coming together and breaking down silos is nothing new. We continue to create new report cards, new councils. We have the coordinated efforts already happening with our agencies, our community partners, our educational systems. Do not reinvent the wheel. If we are going to actually address these issues and want to find solutions, then we have to start looking before they hit that school system, to get them better prepared so that the parents Parents are leading this work. We have an intergenerational advisory council, previously the 2Gen Council, that I formerly chaired with Senator Moore. Representative Kitt has taken over the chair of that. This exists. These agreements between agencies who can talk to one another, community partners, and again, is parent-led, can do this work. I'm so sick and tired of us creating so many different things to come at this. We know what we have to do, so let's just do it.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from our attendees? Yes.
Representative Francis Rexford Cooley. I'm on the Education Committee. One of the things that struck me as we were discussing this is the major issue seems to be that we're just filing paperwork after paperwork on cases that really shouldn't be in the system. And that raises a serious question with regards to the volume, and then DCF being overrun, and then you are going to lose the actual cases, stretching out the timeline. So some type of reform of the system where we're mandated reporters are reporting highly probable cases as opposed to not probable cases needs to be looked at from twofold perspective of you're wasting educational resources filing paperwork that doesn't need to be filed, pulling away resources from the educational work that we should be doing. And we're also overburdening DCF with cases that they shouldn't have to be dealing with. All resources are limited. So if we're flooding the system, it means that we're losing more cases that need to be addressed to look at cases that really shouldn't be in the system in the first place. And I think any reform needs to be able to deal with both of those points, the excessive paperwork that is not necessary in reporting from an educational point of view, and also from DCFs, because essentially you're losing the wheat in the chaff, and the actual cases won't be addressed in a timely manner if they're addressed at all. And we see more than enough reports in the media every year of a tragic situation in which people ask, well, why wasn't this caught earlier? And a lot of times it's just a matter of volume that we're creating that doesn't need to be there.
Thank you for that. I think you articulated that quite well. Yes.
Hi, I kind of want to touch again on the capacity issue and something that, I'm Sarah Kitt, state rep for the 134th district. And touch back on something that I believe Ms. Diaz said about teachers being expected to act as social workers, or they don't have the expertise of a social worker. I would say part of that capacity is building in that social work capacity within our schools. Our school counselors are not school counselors anymore. They are dealing with IEPs and 504s. They're not dealing with the families. They're not dealing with the social work aspects that our kids need. We need to bring in the mental health supports into the schools, because most families don't have access to those types of supports in their communities. And we need to let our teachers be teachers and not be gatekeepers, not be the social workers, not be the surveillance police. So I would encourage any planning that we do include that aspect of enriching our social supports within our school systems that aren't there to police, but are there to actually do the social work to help families and support families.
Joe, could I
Absolutely. Like
just respond? Because there's a notion across the country that's shifting the language from mandated reporters to mandated supporters, right? And we too have looked into that to see is how could we actually actualize a concept like that. And what we've done along the lines of what you're suggesting to try to impact the volume, we've taken 3 of our intake workers completely offline without cases and assigned them to schools in Waterbury, the highest reporting schools in the Waterbury School District, to go to those schools and work with the teachers and administrators in a supportive way to help them understand that, not understand, because I think they know, but feel confident about not reporting and, having DCF holding their hand in that decision rather than being alone in that decision, to take the fear away and to support them through the not reporting, but giving families something else. So far, it's been qualitatively successful. We hear a lot of great feedback. They don't want to give us the staff back. Obviously, they want, and quantitatively, we're still looking at it to see if it's driving down the volume. But you're absolutely right. From that intervention that we create a strategy, we're getting just tons of returns on that.
Because I'm sorry, and I'd be remiss if I didn't add this though, because I haven't heard anyone say this in this whole conversation. And what Deputy Commissioner Williams just said reminded me that this needs to be said. We need to do things, and what you just explained, Michael, is your attempt to de-weaponize mandated reporting. Because if we don't believe that mandated reporting has been weaponized in this system and in the ways that it has been, school versus parents, parents versus schools, and what have you, we're fooling ourselves. And one thing that I want to commend the department on doing is, because when you look at media usually sensationalizes failure more than they celebrate success. And I pay attention to the commissioner's newsletter, and it's a spotlight on what's right. And I want to commend you, Commissioner Durantis, on pushing that forward. And we need more of that, because we do have some of the best educators in the country here, but we also have some of the worst, some of the highest achievers and some of the lowest achievers in Connecticut. So what you all are doing and what I'm hearing gives me hope. Can make me work for 6 more years before I retire, and see the light at the end of the tunnel, because calling it something other than mandated reporting, mandated supporting, sounds a lot better than the weaponized mandated reporting that we had in existence all these years. Thank you.
I am so appreciative of the sentiments being offered here, because I think if we want to talk about turning the corner on this, we are uniquely poised to do so. We have a commissioner who has been thoughtful and reflective about how the commission works and what the intentionality of the department is to do. We have family stakeholders who are saying, we want to be engaged in this work. And we have educators who are saying, help us to do this work better. And that is really the ideal scenario for change. What we need is the legislative support to make it happen. We need the room and the grace, I think, is the perfect term, to actually engage in that work successfully and meaningfully. And I think, there are a lot of spaces and people that want to help us do this. And I think that we need to seize the day, and not tomorrow and not 6 months from now, but today. We need to say this is too big of a problem for us not to solve in the here and now. And I respect, that we want to be thoughtful, because I agree with you, Paul, turning this corner, when you talk about bringing those individuals into Waterbury to hold the hand of an educator, I swear to you, if you told me today I didn't have to report someone, I'd look at you and go, no, I got to do this. So this is a culture shift going back a decade. We've worked really hard to train and weaponize this system so that people see it pointed at them in that way. So when we talk about shifting the narrative of that, it will be a big lift that will require many hands, and changing language, because I do believe words matter. And I think we want our language around this effort to speak to the intention of the effort. But I will say that I feel this with a sense of urgency that is unparalleled in some regards, because I think it is about teacher respect, educator respect, and building our that back in our communities. It's about parental respect and parental engagement and building those relationships stronger. And I think at the end, you end up with stronger communities. So I think that, you know, I'm grateful to Representative Curry for his great passion. You don't ever have to apologize. But I think this is a really powerful and important issue. There's so many impacted parties, and we really have this moment in time and opportunity. And the failure is if we fail to seize it.
Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments from our attendees? I think, did we have any? It was.
Before Kathleen comes on, I do want to add, I just want to thank the commissioner. Our commissioner of this agency has the will and the courage to want to do what's right. And our commissioners just need to be empowered to follow through with that will and that want. So I do want to thank the commissioner for all of her efforts.
So did we have another question or? Okay.
Representative McCarty, you have a question?
Yes, are you able to hear me okay?
We got you now.
Oh, great, thank you. I was having a few technology issues here. I just wanted to really thank everyone for this forum today. It's very enlightening and brought to our attention some of these issues that we still have with mandated reporting. I, for one, am very interested in helping to find the solutions that protect our children, but also protect our teachers and the mandated reporters. I appreciated very much the deputy commissioner's comments. I think the data speaks for itself. We know that there's so many unsubstantiated reporting going on. I think that can help us in fashioning a response that can work for all parties. And I do appreciate very much the comments that came forward that our number one goal is to protect our children. And I think everyone agrees to that. And that's what we want to do. At the same point, it doesn't seem that the system is working right now correctly. So I think it is incumbent upon us to all come together to find those appropriate solutions. I will be looking forward to part B of this forum so that we can begin to look at those solutions that might work. So again, I just really wanted to make the comment of how much I've appreciated this forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Did we have any other questions from attendees or folks online? Well, with that, I do want to thank Commissioner, thank everybody here for the opportunity to come participate in this. This has really been an exceptional conversation. I'm not aware of another place where we've really had a conversation like this, where you had educators, parents, departmental folks, legislators together engaging in this conversation. It's a very, very tough, complicated issue to unwind and come to the right solution. And, I'm really, really hopeful after hearing the conversation today and hearing the way that folks are coming together to think about this issue, that there might actually be not only a solution, but a solution that maybe can help other jurisdictions kind of follow Connecticut's lead as well. I was particularly impacted and just wanted to call out, one of the things that I heard, which was, from our parents really talking about the perspective and this language that I heard from them and language I heard again from our educators around parents feeling like they are kind of on the receiving end of a system that's being weaponized against them, and educators feeling like they're being compelled to weaponize a system against parents, right? And that certainly is not how anybody would design, intentionally, I hope, not how anybody would design a system like this to work, right? That this is really about helping parents and really about helping educators find ways to support parents, and then in the long run, supporting kids. So with that, I think I'll ask Commissioner Durantes if you have any closing wisdom for us.
The wisdom is what we heard on the panel here today. Thank you for excellent facilitation, Joe. Thank you to all of our panelists for sharing not only your perspective, but the perspective of who you represent there, because it's not lost on me that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 people on the panel, but we represent the voices of many who have been impacted. We've heard today that this needle in a haystack approach doesn't make kids safer. We've heard today that children who are in families by which their parents are support communities make a stronger Connecticut. And we know that the governor is very interested in making sure that people can raise their families here and feel good about making it in Connecticut. But we want to make sure that all kids and all families have the same opportunity to do that. And so with that, we appreciate the conversation that we've all had today. We also recognize the fact that being mandated reporters can be shifted to being mandated supporters, as long as we all have the will to lean in, link arms, and make sure that resources are available for children and families to thrive. So thank you, everyone, for your contribution today. But most importantly, thank you for the work that comes out of today.